Greetings and salutations, loyal viewers of this channel. My name is Sean, and today I want to talk about this story out of Brooklyn, New York, where a New York City Parks Department worker is not only being charged with murdering an illegal migrant from Venezuela that was camping out in that park, the one that he was assigned to clean up, but he's also being charged with a hate crime in this particular instance. And the reason I want to talk about this is a couple of fold. One, I talk about the migrant issues repeatedly on this channel, and I emphasize over and over again that it's not that every single one of these people are bad people or anything like that. The system is broken. Joe Biden asked for these people to surge to the border.
I would, in fact, make sure that we immediately surge to the border. All those people are seeking asylum. They deserve to be heard. That's who we are. We're a nation that says if you want to flee and you're fleeing oppression, you should come.
And we are dealing with the consequences of these people coming here for benefits that they were encouraged to come here for. And two, I'm not exactly sure I buy the hate crime angle in this particular story, but I do want to clarify something right off the top. The suspect in this particular case is a black person. He is not a white person. So no, I'm not saying I don't buy the hate crime angle because the suspect was white. Let me just be clear about that. Now, we're going to get into this, but before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
City Parks Department employee is not only accused of shooting a migrant, but now faces murder as a hate crime charges.
So look, I have issues with hate crime laws. You guys out there in the audience have told me repeatedly that you have issues with hate crime laws. It is one of the few crimes that requires mind reading because motivation is actually not required for conviction for any type of crime. It is usually just mens rea, which is evil intent, and actus rea, which is evil acts. You have to intend to do something and then engage in that action in order to do something for you to be convicted of a crime, and hate crimes don't really fit within that. So we all understand that right off the top, so we don't need comments about that because we're just going to go based on the parameters that we have right now. Now, the local news gives us the setup of this. They do not really reveal an image of the suspect, but the name is available, and the New York Post, of course, published the image of the suspect. That's how I know the racial demographics involved in this situation. But without further ado, let's get into the case, and we'll see if you guys can get the problem that I'm getting.
Hey, good morning, Dana Shoshani. Well, it's no secret that people stay and sleep at this park, and that was the case for the victim, who was a Venezuelan migrant. According to investigators, there was some kind of argument between the park's worker as well as the migrant days before the shooting happened, and now this is being investigated as a hate crime.
So at the beginning of this segment, we get a bunch of vagaries, but we can decipher some of the code that is being put forward by my local Fox affiliate, because what they're saying is that there was an argument before, and by the way, this is going to go to premeditation, 3 days before the shooting, between this part-time Parks Department employee and this particular migrant. And this park, by the way, is known for migrants camping out and living here because these people think they're coming here for all of the benefits and largesse of the taxpayer. And by the way, we are paying through the nose for these people. But the fact of the matter is, even with the sanctuary city laws, the right to shelter and all that, a lot of them end up on the streets or sleeping in parks and just generally making New York City worse. So even these people who came for benefits and promises aren't getting them, not all of them, not all the time. So it's really an absolutely horrible system. But the fact of the matter is, in my opinion, whether or not we're going to determine this to be a hate crime is based almost entirely on the nature of this argument. And already, and I want to just make this clear, the fact that they were arguing is actually leaning me into the other direction, because whether or not you have negative feelings towards migrants or not, if you have a specific argument with a specific migrant, like that individual made you angry through whatever actions, then your motivation is personal with that person, not against potentially the broad category of people that you're facing. So this is where I'm like, it's a little bit dubious, even though, again, I'm not defending in any way, shape, or form anyone who commits a murder.
A New York City Parks Department worker has been accused of shooting and killing a migrant. Seasonal employee Elisha Mitchell has been indicted on charges including murder as a hate crime.
Prosecutors say last month, the victim, 30-year-old Arturo Jose Rodriguez Marcano, a Venezuelan migrant, was sleeping inside a tent at Steuben Park. Investigators say Mitchell cleaned the park for work and allegedly went on a rampage, yelling and ripping off tarps because he was angry that migrants were staying there. That led to an argument between the suspect and victim, where Mitchell allegedly showed a gun in his waistband. 3 days later, investigators say Mitchell returned and shot the victim in the chest.
Now, I let that clip play a bit longer than usual for a reason, because that is as similar as I can make it without infringing on copyright to how I heard these versions of events and why I became so suspicious of this particular case. So I wanted you guys to take that in on your own, give you a moment to put your thoughts in the comments of this particular video before we start going over it piece by piece, because right off the top, we have an issue with this being a motivation where it involves broad anger against migrants for being migrants.
Prosecutors say last month, the victim, 30-year-old Arturo Jose Rodriguez Marcano, a Venezuelan migrant, was sleeping inside a tent at Steuben Park. Investigators say Mitchell cleaned the park for work and allegedly went on a rampage, yelling and ripping off tarps because he was angry that migrants were staying there.
So this particular suspect, who very notably is not pictured throughout the course of this segment, is somebody who works part-time, and it is his job to clean the parks. So when he shows up to the park and he sees a bunch of tents and all of that, obviously that's making him upset because he cannot do his actual job if these people are camping and making a mess of the parks. But instead of getting angry and moving on with his day, he decided that he was going to rip off, in frustration, a bunch of these different tents, and that ultimately ended up leading to an argument between the alleged killer in this particular case and the victim. During the course of the argument, as told to us by the local news, he apparently flashed a gun, and then 3 days later, he comes back to this location, engages in an altercation with the same person who ultimately ended up dying, and that person gets killed.
3 days later, investigators say Mitchell returned and shot the victim in the chest.
And this is where I have a major problem. Unless there are more facts that are not available to me, which, by the way, almost certainly there are, but I'm talking about specifically pertaining to the motivation in this particular case, I don't buy into the hate crime narrative. This was not somebody who was generally angry at migrants. He didn't go out of his way to go to a shelter or something like that in order to commit a crime against them. He didn't go to a park or an encampment that was near him that he had nothing to do with. This was a guy who was angry that he couldn't do his job because these people were messing up the park that he was tasked to clean up. So essentially, their behavior ended up resulting in him doing extra work, and that's what got him angry. Then he ends up ripping down all these different various tents, and according to reports, our victim and him ended up getting into a confrontation over that. So then, after this argument, after he flashes the gun, the migrant ends up backing off, this guy leaves, and he decides, cooking on that anger for 3 days, to come back, according to the charging documents, and shoot the migrant in the chest, ultimately killing him. But to me, this is not motivated by general hatred toward migrants. This is motivated by hatred towards the people who are setting up camp. They could have been homeless people, not migrants. And the same thing could have possibly occurred. And then an even more specific issue with one particular migrant that he got into an argument with after he was ripping down the tents. To me, this does not make a biased enhanced crime or a hate crime, and this is one of the reasons why I'm so against these types of enhancements, because we have to play games on whether or not we're mind reading the proper motivation of this particular person, when in reality, according to what we see right now, if convicted, it would be murder, a premeditated murder, undeniably so, and that should be enough for a significant sentence. Now, this is where I would like to flip the script on you guys a little bit, because there are statements in the New York Post article that, if read in said New York Post article, give you the impression that maybe, just maybe, this was, in fact, a hate crime. Let me read you these quotes because they're fascinating. So, first, we have, quote, "I don't have time to let a migrant F up what I got going on in my life," Mitchell told the cops, according to documents filed as he was indicted for murder as a hate crime Wednesday in Brooklyn court. "The government," this is another quote, "let them come in here and they get $1,500 a month. they get free money a month. He continued, you work for your money, right? Y'all were born here. This is y'all country. This is our country. So right here, when I went digging, it looked like, okay, maybe they have something for a hate crime. Now I could try to make the argument that maybe because these statements were said afterwards, this wasn't the motivation, and I could cling to my original motivation. But based on these excerpts of these quotes from the New York Post article, it would appear, at least, that the migrant status had something to do with it. But please allow me to flip the script once more, because I decided to look into these quotes even further because they were snippets, and I found additional context that might change your opinion. Because a quote left out of the New York Post article reads as follows, quote, if I have a problem, it's with the government, he told detectives, according to the transcript of his interrogation. Quote, that's the people who let them in here. I work for 7 days a week. I don't have time to let a migrant F up what I got going on in my life. They're trying to fix their life. Now, is that not the damnedest thing? The most devastating quote, possibly, from the New York Post article has a bunch of words around it that kind of appear to change the whole entire thing. Now, in fact, that quote that is being used by the New York Post to justify the hate crime charges was a part of him in this lengthy interrogation, insisting that he had no issue with migrants, which I find to be incredibly interesting. Now, I also want to point out that according to the reporting, Mitchell is homeless, and he works 2 part-time jobs, the Parks Department job where this occurred, and apparently he works at the Randall's Island shelter run by the nonprofit Hope USA, which is different from the famous Randall's Island shelter that we often refer to when it comes to stabbings.
In a statement, the Brooklyn District Attorney says this defendant allegedly came to the location where the victim was staying armed with a gun to settle a score. This premeditated and cold-blooded homicide is outrageous on many levels, not least because the alleged motive was hatred towards new arrivals to our city.
So here's the statement from the Brooklyn District Attorney. For those of you who are unaware, each borough in New York City has their own district attorney, and he says, this is horrible. What we have right here is a premeditated action. This guy came back after an argument to settle a score. Again, all the things that I was saying based on me not only listening to this report, but reading into the case a little bit more based on articles and whatnot. And then he says, oh, and not the least of which, the reasons why this is so heinous is because it was motivated by hatred against new arrivals. First of all, we're talking about illegal immigrants, people defrauding the asylum system. And right now in this moment, I don't have anything to say that he generally hates illegal migrants or Venezuelan migrants or asylum fraudsters or whatever you want to call them. What it seems like to me is that he doesn't like the people who happen to be migrants that were camping in the park that he was tasked with cleaning, and he was angry about the tents, so he was ripping them down. But again, presumably, if these were homeless citizens in the same numbers doing the same things, I could very likely see the same exact outcome happening. Now, to be clear, this is not meant to be interpreted in any way, shape, or form as a defense for the murder. The murder is a murder. By its very nature, it is unjustified. We have premeditation. Trying to settle a score is incredibly stupid. This is an ego battle. It's idiotic in every possible way from top to bottom, and I have no sympathy at all whatsoever for somebody who would do this to someone because they were angry about them setting up tents. Again, that is on New York City for allowing them to do so. That is on the Biden administration for encouraging them to do so. That is on Kamala Harris for being absolutely horrible as the borders are, again, allowing this to happen, policies that she wanted to happen. That is not on the individual who responded to incentives, but I just don't think this is about that. I think this guy didn't want to do extra work. These people were camping there. He got angry. He decided to settle a score on an argument. And all of that has nothing to do with migrant status per se, other than the fact that this guy happened to be a migrant that fit all of those other parameters. Now, again, this is one of those cases where you guys can reasonably disagree with me on how you assess these statements. I just find it very interesting that a lot of these local news reports don't have any statements from this guy's interrogation, and then the New York Post, which I think had the first set of statements from them, end up having excerpts from the middle of sentences that are actually a portion of the denial of the allegation that it was biased against migrants. And this guy says he has an issue with the city and all that, but at the same time, if you have an issue with the governing bodies in the way that they treat migrants, and you end up taking it out on the migrants, let's say it's not due to what could be a plausible explanation for a dispute for different motivations with this particular migrant, then I think that would be enough to enhance with hate crime charges if that's the argument you're trying to make. But again, it depends on how you read these statements. I would love to see the video of this interrogation so I can get the context and cadence and whatnot. It is a lengthy interrogation. I'm sure there's more statements, but he seems to be vehemently denying this portion of it, so I'm not quite sure about this one. And this is where I get a bit worried, because in this case, it shouldn't matter. You shouldn't need a hate crime enhancement for a premeditated, cold-blooded murder like this one that they appear to have him dead to rights on, but in other cases where you have potential arguments that may lead into a fight or something like that, that would normally be treated as a misdemeanor or whatever, slight altercations that people have, if you're going to use the fact that the person that you're arguing with has migrant status to enhance the charges on the citizens in those cases, then we're having problems. Then we have more additional special protections for these people that are already in our country illegally, for these people that are already defrauding the asylum system, and I don't like that. It is a very slippery slope. And by the way, it is very notable that in this particular case, we're not talking about a white person getting this enhancement. We're talking about a black person getting this enhancement, a city employee, and this is not something that you would expect based on the way that hate crime laws are typically charged. So yeah, I am kind of worried about this. If they're willing to do this to a black person, that means they can do it to anyone. Now look, I want to know what you guys think about this down in the comments below. You can evaluate the individual case on its merits, the hate crime charges alone, all of that. Give me your opinion, and as per usual, if you like the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on the social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about a horrific murder that is weirdly being enhanced with hate crime charges. Till next time.